Imagine a society where the wealthiest few don't just influence laws, they write them. Where they don't just benefit from policies, they create them. Where state power isn't just swayed by wealth, it's wielded by it. Sounds familiar? Well, over 2,300 years ago, in his great work Politics, Aristotle identified a system of government he called oligarchy, rule by the wealthy few. Based on his studies of history and politics, he described how this system arises, how it maintains power, and why it's inherently unstable. As you read Aristotle's description of oligarchy, you might start to recognize some unsettling parallels to your own society today. From the concentration of wealth to the influence of money in politics, Aristotle's ancient insights in many ways feel eerily modern. So in the next few minutes, we'll break down Aristotle's blueprint of oligarchy, perhaps uncovering how its ancient patterns may still occasionally echo in the corridors of power today. To understand Aristotle's view of oligarchy, we first need to understand his categories of regime types. In his typical systematic approach, Aristotle identified 6 distinct types of government, divided into 2 categories. There are the true forms and their perverted counterparts. Within the 3 true forms, we have monarchy first. In its ideal form, the monarch would be virtuous and govern for the common good. Next is aristocracy, which is ruled by a select few. For Aristotle, these aren't just the wealthy or the well-born, but the aristos, meaning the best, most virtuous, and most capable members of society. The third true form is what Aristotle called polity, sometimes translated as constitutional government. This is a mixed system, blending elements of democracy and oligarchy, but with a strong legal basis that prevents any powerful group from abusing the others. Now, for each of these, Aristotle identified a corresponding perverted form, a government that shares similarities with its true counterpart, but has deviated from the path of virtue and common good. Monarchy's corrupt twin is tyranny, as I presented in a previous video, and democracy is seen by Aristotle as the perverted form of polity. It's ruled by the masses, but without the legal limits of the polity, where decisions are driven by the majority's desires rather than the common good. For Aristotle, this often leads to demagoguery, instability, and the erosion of justice. And finally, we come to oligarchy. As Aristotle notes, the poor and the rich fight with each other, and whichever side wins doesn't set up a fair or popular government. Instead, they see political power as their prize for winning, and one side sets up democracy, while the other sets up an oligarchy. Remember, aristocracy is ruled by the aristos, or the best. Oligarchy, on the other hand, is a perversion of this ideal. In an oligarchy, focus shifts from the welfare of the community to the interests of the rulers themselves. It's no longer about who is most capable or most dedicated to the common good, but about who has the most money or property. In aristocracy, leaders are chosen based on their ability to govern well and their commitment to the public interest. In oligarchy, the path to power is paved with gold, and the purpose of rule becomes the preservation and expansion of the ruler's wealth and influence. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process from usually polity, democracy, or aristocracy, and often subtle at first. Perhaps wealth starts as just one factor among many in selecting leaders, but over time, it becomes the dominant or even sole criterion. Or maybe virtuous leaders slowly begin to prioritize their own interests over those of the community. Aristotle noted that oligarchies, like tyrannies, are forms of government where power is used to benefit those in control rather than the broader community. So both systems are self-serving, but while tyranny is ruled by one person and his close circle, an oligarchy is ruled by a few more individuals. But more importantly, tyrants often rely on military force, whereas oligarchs first and foremost gain and maintain their power through their wealth. This is sometimes written into the law, but often it's just based on informal influence, which leads to laws and policies that favor the wealthy. The main point is that power is kept within the wealthy few, either through high property qualifications for holding office, or by making the process of running for office too expensive for most people. This financial control allows them to operate within existing legal and political systems, manipulating these systems to suit their needs. This gives oligarchies an appearance of legitimacy, making them seem more stable than tyrannies, but Aristotle still considered them unstable at their core. Oligarchs are skilled at using their political power to protect and grow their wealth. They might pass laws that give them lucrative government contracts, protect business monopolies, or create regulations that limit competition. These tactics can sometimes lead to supreme oligarchy, where the wealthy have unchecked power and ignore any appearance of cultural or constitutional limits. In these cases, decisions are made solely for the benefit of the ruling elite rather than for the good of society. This disregard for the common good is another trait that oligarchies share with tyrannies, making them similarly dangerous to a state's stability. Also, like tyrants, oligarchs tend to distrust the general population. They might disarm the common people and hire foreign mercenaries to guard against potential uprisings. This reflects their very real fear of losing control, leading them to keep the poor at bay, sometimes even pushing them out of cities by making urban living too expensive, or taking more direct measures to maintain their grip on power. Aristotle pointed out that oligarchy isn't a single uniform system, but rather a spectrum with different types. On one end, there are extreme forms where only the very richest have power. In other forms, a small, powerful minority controls the government, and while it might seem open to those with modest wealth, it remains firmly in the hands of a gatekeeping inner circle. So how do these oligarchies come to power? Aristotle explained that it often starts with a gradual shift. A small group of people begin to accumulate more wealth, which in turn allows them to gain more political influence. As their power grows, they shape policies and institutions in ways that further increase their wealth, creating a cycle where wealth leads to power and power leads to more wealth. A system that seems democratic or aristocratic can start to slide into oligarchy without most people noticing. Over time, certain signs become clearer. The wealthiest begin to control all key government roles and institutions. Merit and ability become less important than wealth for gaining leadership positions. And the idea that economic inequality also justifies political inequality becomes more accepted. Once an oligarchy is established, the people in power use several tactics to keep their hold on power. First, they use state power to keep class distinctions in place, reinforcing social barriers that prevent people from moving up. This might involve controlling the education system to ensure that only their children can afford the opportunities for leadership roles, or enacting laws that make it harder for those born into lower classes to build wealth or social status. Gradually, oligarchies take control over the legal system and lawmaking process. They shape laws to serve their interests, often claiming they are just protecting property rights or maintaining economic stability. This can mean taxes that benefit the wealthy, or regulations that protect their businesses from competition. Eventually, the wealthy begin to exert influence over all crucial aspects of society, perhaps the primary industries, major trade routes, or the means of cultural production. Furthermore, oligarchies rely on strong alliances among elites. These aren't just political alliances, but also social and economic connections, like intermarriage between powerful families, shared business interests, and exclusive clubs. These connections create a tightly knit ruling class that works together to maintain its control. Over time, this concentration of power and wealth often leads to a decline in public virtue, where personal gain takes priority over the common good among all members of society. At this point, you might be wondering how these ancient insights apply to the world around us. While Aristotle was examining the city-states of ancient Greece, his observations on oligarchy were remarkably astute and perhaps relevant to a few other societies throughout history. Let's consider some signs that might indicate the presence of oligarchic tendencies. First, look at laws and regulations that benefit the wealthy at the expense of the general populace or society at large. This isn't always obvious. It might be hidden in complex tax codes or subtle regulatory structures. Imagine, for instance, a tax code that allows owners of luxury yachts to claim significant deductions while providing no comparable options for ordinary citizens. Next, examine economic policies. Do they tend to increase concentration of wealth? Aristotle noted that oligarchies use their power to further enrich themselves. Consider a hypothetical society where the government consistently bails out large corporations, which hits the general population with inflation, higher taxes, and reduced public services. Over time, this could lead to increased wealth concentration. Another key indicator is access to political office. In a true oligarchy, only the wealthy can realistically attain positions of power. As mentioned, this might not be an explicit law, but picture a hypothetical political system where running for office requires millions in personal funds or backing from wealthy donors. This effectively restricts political participation to the rich or those supported by the rich. Related to this is the question of who has genuine access to lawmakers and regulators. In an oligarchic system, the wealthy few have the ear of those in power, while ordinary citizens struggle to make their voices heard. Imagine a scenario where industry leaders regularly hold private meetings with lawmakers and powerful bureaucrats to discuss policy, while requests for meetings from ordinary citizens and smaller organizations are usually denied or ignored. Also look for a so-called revolving door between government and the private sector. If you see a constant flow of individuals moving between positions of political power and high-level corporate roles, that might indicate the kind of close alliance between wealth and governance that Aristotle associated with oligarchy. Picture a situation where a high-ranking official in the finance ministry leaves his post for a lucrative position in a major bank, or a former minister getting hired in a corporation within his former portfolio. Social mobility is another crucial factor. Aristotle understood that oligarchies work to maintain class distinctions. Consider a hypothetical society where the cost of education has skyrocketed to the point where only the children of wealthy families can attend universities without incurring crippling debt, thereby limiting opportunities for advancement for those from less affluent backgrounds. Remember, Aristotle didn't see these as isolated factors, but as symptoms of a political system that prioritizes the interests of the wealthy few over the common good. No society perfectly fits any single model of governance, and elements that might appear oligarchic could exist within various other political systems. The key is to look at the overall pattern and to consider how political and economic power are distributed and used. The good news is that Aristotle found oligarchies to be inherently unstable, second only to tyrannies in their short lifespan. The bad news is that they are often replaced by another perverted form of government. He recognized that political regimes fall for many reasons, but he saw revolt as a primary cause, particularly in oligarchies. One interesting observation he made was about the introduction of new cultural or ethnic groups into an existing political community. He argued that this could be a significant source of instability and conflict, especially if these groups don't quickly develop a shared sense of identity or common purpose with the existing population. Internal conflict among the oligarchs themselves is another major factor. This could be a situation where a small group within the oligarchy becomes greedy and attempts to monopolize all the offices of power. Aristotle noted that his hyper-concentration of power often leads to resentment and conflict within the ruling class, destabilizing the entire system. Perhaps the most significant threat to oligarchies, in Aristotle's view, comes from popular revolt against state-sanctioned oppression. The constant tension between the rich and the poor creates a powder keg of social unrest. He also noted the role of populist leaders. These figures would emerge and capitalize on the people's discontent by promising reforms. While this will sometimes lead to one of the three so-called true regime types, Aristotle observed that they often result in a new oligarchy or even tyranny. Another fascinating insight from Aristotle concerns the generational aspect of oligarchic decline. He said that the children of oligarchs, raised in luxury and comfort, tend to become degenerate and weak over time. Meanwhile, the children of the poor are hardened by their difficult circumstances and become tough. This disparity equips the poor to rebel successfully against their rulers. As we wrap up, Aristotle's analysis of oligarchy provides us with some timeless insights into the dynamics of wealth and power in governance. From the gradual rise of oligarchic rule to the tactics used by the wealthy few to maintain their grip on power, these ancient observations may, perhaps, maybe, resonate a bit in our modern world. I'd love to hear your perspective. Are there parallels you can draw to your own society? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this exploration valuable, please consider joining our Patreon. Supporters get access to audio-only versions of our videos, and your support is crucial in our mission to bring these timeless ideas to a wider audience. Thank you for watching.